Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. In today's installment, we shall be discussing episode 50, Don't Bank on It, or, as it's known in the Japanese original, Save Up! The Cursed Piggy Bank! This episode was originally released in Japan on September 28th, 2002 as the 50th episode, while the English dub done by the notorious 4Kids was released on September 27th, 2003 as the 48th episode. Wow, we're already halfway done with this entire series, man. It's been quite the journey, and we still got quite the way to go, but just pause and think about how far we've come. From here on out, we'll only be going downhill in terms of numbers. The change between release date was likely due to the change between releases of other episodes, as opposed to anything wrong with this specific episode itself. But now that we've done all this pre-review stuff, let us start with the episode proper. The episode opens to an outside shot of Castle Deity as we see the camera then cut to the king talking to the enemy sales guy. It is here that we see the first change between versions. In the Japanese original, the king is surprised that what he ordered was finished, with the enemy sales guy explaining that they worked on his order all through the night. The king compliments the company's work ethic before Escargoon warns him that it'll be hard to get a discount if they praise the company too much. The enemy sales guy then explains that due to being a custom order, it is a bit pricier than a normal order. In the English dub, this is changed to the enemy sales guy saying that the order is free, but that there is a service charge and shipping plus handling fee, which in either case ends up to a total cost of 900 billion D-Den. Wow, that's a lot. The king and Escargoon understandably balk at this extreme price before the petty tyrant demands to be sent his order. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, the enemy sales guy says that he should make plans before ordering from them again, clearly annoyed. In the English dub, he says that if they do that, they'll have to add a rush cost. Both versions of the scene work well, and while they are quite different in terms of the dialogue, the scene in both versions functions well to convey that sort of sleazy company, Amazon Prime sort of thing. In either version, we then see the enemy sales guy send over this episode's equivalent of a monster slash character of the week, though really it's more of an object, that being the DDD dolls, or sometimes called Mini D dolls. Let's talk about them now. So, the DDD dolls, or I guess in the Japanese original, as they're more often referred to as Mini D dolls, that they do it in the English dub a bit, are these weird, creepy looking dolls that have some special powers that I won't spoil right away, but they are modeled after the King DDD, obviously, and I think they're rather disturbing, especially the blank dead eyes. They give off that sort of possessed voodoo Chucky vibe. I mean, really, they're kind of creepy, though. Being dolls, they don't actually have their own voice actor, technically speaking, or really any personality at all, so they're not one of these possessed dolls that actually goes out of its way to kill people. But I think in terms of the episode, that's fine. They serve their function well. Escargoon is understandably horrified by all these dolls. The king, however, gets angry at the perceived insult and hits him over the head with a hammer before he says that they look handsome, because of course the egomaniacal guy would compliment something based off himself, as they are modeled after him. And he, of course, is handsome in his own mind. He walks over and says to Escargoon that he'll make a lot of money off of these things, as we then cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we then cut to Cappytown, where we see Captain Waddle Doo leading a set of Waddle Dees, who then proceed to deliver these DDD dolls to all the various inhabitants of the town, including Melman the Mailman, Sheriff, Chief Bookums, his wife, Kawasaki, Mabel, Samo, Gengu, Gus, the mayor, and his entire family. We then cut to Tiff and her family at the castle, inspecting the gift that they also got. Tiff says that they're ugly, as the real deal is obviously also ugly, as her mom says that it's something she's never really gotten before. Cerebrum tries to be a bit more positive, saying that it's not totally ugly, to which his wife says that he needs to get his eyes checked. Tough, utterly disgusted, goes to throw the doll away, but is stopped when we see the television suddenly display an advertisement slash public service announcement for the dolls. Escargoon says that it'll change their lives as we see Professor Curio and others watching this weird infomercial. And even the rarely seen parents of Honey also make an appearance. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Escargoon really plays up the religious slash cult overtures when promoting this product. For kids, desiring to remove all religious references greatly toned down most of this. Honestly, looking back, this seems really silly and just something that was completely unnecessary. And I mean, yeah, it's just sad that that happened. We then see the various Cappies, including Gengu, Mabel, and Kawasaki, all being rather skeptical about how this doll will bring happiness, with Mabel saying that it's not particularly cute. And we then see the king do some more sloganeering as Escargoon does some of those standard warnings when it comes to infomercials, and the two end the commercial with a cheer. We then cut to Kirby, who is sleeping in the tree as he always does, as we see the camera pan over to his quote-unquote house, with Takori, the wretched bird, is shown waiting for something, as the beleaguered Waddle Doo himself delivers a box. Takori asks if this gift is for him, but Waddle Doo says that this is for Kirby. The wretched bird complains about it, but the sniveling usurper schemes a very sinister plan and lies to Waddle Doo that he'll give it to Kirby, and the duped Waddle Doo leaves a package with the terrible poultry. Takori then says he better open the box to make sure the doll is safe, as the camera pans over to Kirby, who's still sleeping, unaware of this whole incident even happening. We then cut back to the castle, where Escargoon asks if it was really a good idea to give the dolls away for free, given that they are already in quite a bit of debt, but the king assures him that he has a plan to get money, which will use the dolls, though the snail is skeptical of this. We then cut to Tiff, who surprisingly puts the DDD doll, despite her general skeptical attitude, into her bed, presumably to scare the mice away before going asleep. It becomes night as we see Cerebrum, Ladylike, Tough, and King Dedede sleeping. The clock strikes midnight, and the king groggily gets up to start his scheme, walking onto one of the castle's outdoor areas before he begins speaking aloud an incantation. He commands them to like King Dedede and that they trust him. And it's revealed that the dolls are able to repeat this mantra out of themselves and sort of hypnotize them, as we see the Cappies getting into some weird sleep pain. We see the indoctrination of Kawasaki, the mayor, and his wife, Bookums, his wife, Tuggle, Takori, Tiff, Tuff, and their parents. It is then revealed that the dolls have sort of magic power to them that sort of explains why King Dedede was giving them for free, and the king continues his chanting. We then cut to the next day where we see the wretched bird Takori awaken drowsily. Kirby, friendly as ever, goes over to him, but the criminal bird decides to compliment King Dedede, much to Kirby's confusion. We then cut to Cappytown to see Kawasaki walking over to Tuggle, the grocery store owner, and Chief Bookums. The three begin talking about how wonderful King Dedede is before they become shocked themselves about what they just said. We then see Professor Curio walking down the street, and he says, "Isn't the king wonderful?" as he stops in place and is shocked that he just said that. And, well, the others are shocked as well. The mayor then walks up to them and says, "It's a wonderful day." But they all get really angry at him and ask him if that's all he's got to say, which is kind of sudden. The mayor is understandably flummoxed at their sudden aggression, as he then says that he also likes King Dedede. This statement not only shocks the four already there, the mayor even asks himself why he just said that, being unaware of why he did that. We then see Kawasaki and the others leave, seemingly wishing to exit this rather awkward conversation. We then cut to Tiff and her family, having some breakfast. Sir Ibram, as he pours some tea, says that Dedede is wonderful. His wife agrees, and as does Tiff and Tuffs, even though they tend to dislike him. There is a sudden pause, however, when they realize what they just said and how silly it was. We then cut to the next midnight, where we see the king get up groggily and repeat the process. This time, though, they get more specific instructions, as the king tells them to put all their spare change into the dolls, and under the spell of the dolls, we see the various cappies and other people put money into their dolls. Even Tiff does it. We also see the next change between versions in this scene. In the Japanese original, this scene plays in the background a minor key version of the Invincibility Candy theme, and frankly, I just think it sounds amazing, and I hope that one day it gets put into the games at some point. Ford Kids sadly saw fit to remove it and pretty much all other background music and replace it with a frankly far less noteworthy original track. It's one of those technically minor changes, but it's real sad because I think it does genuinely harm the scene. Plus, the music in the Japanese original is just better, but while minor, and I admit, I still think it just was a weird decision. Regardless, in both versions, we then cut to the next day as we see the various cappies getting all excited at getting supposedly lucky money that was generated by the doll. After that, we then cut to the next night as we see the king get up once again, and he complains about getting no rest and complains about how he has to do this. He then gets more direct in his demands as he orders the cappies and others to put all their money into the dolls. We see the cappies doing so as Sammo even goes to the cash register and deposits his money into the doll. The king, in this state, also assures them that he'll keep their money safe. We then cut to the next day as we see Dedede say the episode's title and that there is a new bank open. Escargoon explains to the cappies and others that the cappies can put their money somewhere safer than the dolls, as we see the king's true plan to pay off all his debt, with Escargoon enticing them with autographs, sticker books, and other worthless knickknacks. The cappies voluntarily swarm to give over their life savings to the scheming monarch. The two evildoers laugh, with Escargoon complimenting the king on his genius plan, as he's tricked them into giving all over their money due to dolls. We cut outside to see even Tiff has fallen victim, checking her checkbook. She bumps into Meta Knight, who seems to have been unaffected due to likely either not getting a doll or maybe he's immune. He asks, shocked, if she really did deposit her money in the bank. She explains to him that money appeared in the doll and that she wanted to put it in the bank for safekeeping. He points out and asks the obvious question of if she ever thought about where the money came from, as she, with a concerned look, thinks it over in her mind. We then cut back to the bank as Escargoon closes the vault before complimenting Didi's plan, but pauses when he sees Didi is very tired from not sleeping for several days. Escargoon tells him to wake up as there's still one customer that hasn't been paid, that being Kirby. King Dedede gets enraged and sees red, but he gets overwhelmed by sleep deprivation and wanders away to sleep. We then cut to Kirby's house where we see the terrible Takori sleeping with a doll. Kirby goes and grabs the doll before taking it back up to his nest and going back to sleep with it. We then cut back to Escargoon's room where we see the king creepily sneak in a Dedede doll onto Escargoon's bedside table. The king then goes to act out one more of those spells, but seems to have either like a nervous breakdown due to a lack of sleep or just getting so enraged, and begins attacking the various cabbies, including Kawasaki, Gus, Curio, Escargoon, and even Kirby, though thankfully in Kirby's case, it ends up attacking the terrible bird Chikori, so it's not that bad. And everyone suffers except Tiff, who, under Meta Knight's advice, decided to put her doll into the cabinet before going to sleep. We then cut to the next day where we see Escargoon complain to the king that the doll attacked him during his sleep. The king gleefully admits to this, explaining that he's happy to have done so, given how now he's not the only one who hasn't gotten any sleep. Escargoon, annoyed at this and wishes he could punch the king, and in anger does so to the doll. The king screams in pain and asks Escargoon threw something at him, but Escargoon denies this and says all he did was punch the doll. We then cut to Kirby and to Corey, who asks Kirby to take out that doll who attacked him. And Kirby does so, which causes the king to fall over as Kirby kicks it. Escargoon goes over to help, tossing the doll away, which, of course, sends the king flying across the room. Escargoon says he's acting batty and throws the doll into the air to try to improve a point which, as established before, forces the king to be flung into the air and eventually fall onto his head. The king is confused and runs to the throne room and calls up the enemy sales guy to explain what's going on. The sales guy asks how the dolls are doing, with the king explaining the problem, to which Escargoon demonstrates by tossing the doll, much to the king's chagrin as he's sent flying. The enemy sales guy explains that when they made the dolls to his specifications, there was a slight side effect, meaning that there's a psychic bond between the king and the dolls. The king then decides that he should really round them up, which is his best solution to prevent himself from getting into anything really bad happening. And so, with that, the two head off to collect this merchandise. The king and Escargoon make some snide comments. We then cut to Tiff's room where we see her ask her parents why Didi took all his dolls away. The parents say they don't know, while Tiff notices that it seems like they fought to keep it, as we see the two have been utterly beaten up, with her father even having a black eye. We then cut to Capitan, where we see Escargoon and Didi confiscating all the dolls. Kawasaki is particularly upset at this, and the king says he's too old for dolls, which I mean is technically true, but given today's culture, that's kind of funny. We then see Escargoon and Chief Bookums fighting over a doll, and them pulling at each other end causes the king to get stretched and strangled. Escargoon tries to get him to stop complaining, saying that he's trying to help, before the king is suddenly sent flying into the air. As we see Spikehead, the Cappy Kid, is tossing the doll up into the air. Escargoon grabs it as the poor king falls onto the ground, with the kid confused of exactly where he came from. Escargoon then says that they have all of them except for one last doll, Kirby's. Cutting to him, we see Takori kicking out the doll, which then rolls down the hill into the river, which of course happens to the king as well, and he's seen screaming as he goes downhill. Tiff and Meta Knight watch this, utterly confused at his behavior, before Kirby wanders into view. Chikori gives him the go-ahead to play with it, and he then begins poking the floating doll with a stick, unaware of the fact that while he does so, the king is struggling not to drown. As a fish bites the doll on the butt, we see a giant demonic fish be summoned that begins attacking the king. And oh boy, this guy is really big. The doll floats past Kawasaki, who helps Kirby out by fishing the doll out of the river, which ends up getting stuck in a tree, and of course, the king is sent flying into the air and landing into a similar tree. Kirby then plays with the doll, which sees the king getting the Loki treatment.
Puny god.
And he's also sent spinning around and rolled around and just eventually coming to a stop as we see Escargoon explaining what happened to the king to both Meta Knight and Tiff, who then says things are going back to normal as everyone is going back to the bank to get their money back after having their dolls taken away. We cut to the bank where we see the vault has been completely empty. Escargoon points out how they're right back to where they started as they're back in debt. But then the king falls to his knees and cries at the state. And he has an idea to make use of the last doll to get his revenge on Kirby. Escargoon warns him of the danger, but he ignores this and begins wailing in the air, which causes the doll to start attacking Kirby. We then cut back to the others as the doll gets up and begins to attack Kirby. And just, man, it's really bad. Kawasaki has an idea and runs off as we cut back to the defunct bank and we see the others confused at the king's sudden movements, with Escargoon saying that it must be all the sleep deprivation that's affecting his mental state. We see Kawasaki digging a hole, and he tells Kirby to kick the doll in, and Kirby does so, which leads to the doll and the real deity getting buried. It is here we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, Escargoon says it's too early for him to be in the grave, with the English dub changed in order to avoid references to death, seeing him commentating on how embarrassing this is after Tiff makes a similar comment. We then cut back to Kawasaki and Kirby, who have successfully buried the doll. Everything is fine until a bothersome mole arrives and, after bumping into the doll, bites into it, which causes the king to break free and go into a rage at being attacked, and then begins using his hammer to attack Kirby, getting a few shots in. The doll, surprisingly, has its own hammer, and the petulant Bertakori, for once in his life, actually gives some good advice to someone and tells Kirby to suck it up. And while, yes, the king does try to hold on for dear life, even he is not strong enough to resist the great suck. And we see Kirby sucking up the doll. But much like a Gabon, it ends up giving him no abilities, as we then cut to King Dedede, who is seen floating through the endless void of a pocket dimension inside Kirby, and the episode ends with the Dedede doll floating in a bubble, which is a reference to the ending scene of the 1968 science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey, made by the noted film creator Stanley Kubrick, which was infamous for having one of those embryos floating in space. Interestingly enough, this is actually not the first time that the anime has made reference to this frankly amazing science fiction movie. Last time it was in episode 13, Happy New Year, which is another video I suggest you check out as it's another good episode. It's kind of interesting how this episode is one of the few that has an unresolved ending. The other one is episode 39, Escargon, which I've already reviewed, so go ahead and check that out. It's also a pretty good episode. And some have hypothesized that Kirby likely spit the doll out at some point after the episode ended, which, I mean, while only a fan theory, it does make sense given that there are other episodes after this one, but now let us discuss the positives, the negatives, and my final thoughts on this episode. In terms of positives, I actually have quite a bit to say. First, while yes, the DDD dolls don't really have much character in and of themselves, I actually liked the implementation of them within this episode. And I thought that the plot of the episode was really good. In fact, you actually get a few hints that they're important as both Tough tries to throw it away, and Chief Bookums almost knocks it over, but they don't, which is a nice touch, because if they did, it would have ruined the whole plot. But that was really neat. And the king's plan was also quite good, though some would say that he did make quite a few mistakes that were kind of stupid, honestly. Like, why didn't he take a break between nights so that he wouldn't be as tired? Why did he decide to not seal the vault better? But I think those flaws are not something that's actually serious, given that they fit the king's character. You see, a lot of people consider her an annoying Mary Sue type character, but this episode shows that she's actually just as flawed and can, in the right circumstances, be just as duped like anyone else. Now, unlike some people, I'm not going to condescend to you and pretend that the term Mary Sue is a sexist one, as it does apply in some scenarios, but I just wanted to say that in this situation, in this character, I definitely think Tiff is not one. I also just found the scenes of the town folk praising the king and then catching themselves doing that were just hilarious. Like, they're not completely hypnotized and they can recognize what they're saying is stupid, but they still do it anyway, and that's kind of funny. And Kirby, despite not getting an ability, was well done in this episode. In terms of negatives, I dislike Takoi's presence here, and I just thought that he could have been completely removed and nothing of value would have been lost. Maybe replace him with Tiff or something. And I thought that the bank plan was kind of rushed and seemed pointless. And though while the plan itself was good, I don't know why he would do that. And especially since they get their money back from the bank easily, like, why even putting it in there? It's just silly. You'd think you'd have locks or something. I also didn't know where best to fit this last trivia point, but since it's a negative, I'll put it in here. In the Nintendo Anime channel, the description says that if you leave DDD dolls under the pillow, it will make you happy. Even though in the episode, the DDD dolls were set beside the table, not underneath the pillow. Not a flaw with the episode itself, it's just a funny goof on a now defunct service, and I thought it was worth mentioning. Also, Meta Knight and Escargoon seemed just a little tacked on. Plus, there was, of course, the general problems of, like, the censorship and change between versions when not necessary. Like that music. I mean, why would you replace it? It was perfectly fine. In fact, I would say it was arguably a beautiful piece. In conclusion, I thought this episode was rather good. While, yes, the lack of a copyability or monster does make it slightly more forgettable, the plot as a whole is sufficiently intriguing to give it a watch, which is something that you'll probably do when you're binging the show in its entirety. And it's definitely worth it, even if it's not necessarily at the top of the list. I'm the Dark Master, and join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. Subscribe if you like this video, and have a nice day and take care.